In this week's episode, we will be covering and talking about some of the core principles at the heart of the following questions. Why do we keep having that same issue and problem over and over and over? No matter what we do to try and shake it, it keeps coming back in our lives. What really motivates you? What really is at the heart of tapping into consistent motivation? And why do so many people struggle to feel that sense of motivation in life? Why do we sometimes do things compulsively and automatically that we know aren't that good for us, and yet there's a whole bunch of things we could be doing that we know would be great for us or improve our lives or make us even feel good, and yet we don't do them? What dictates your preferences? Have you ever wondered that? Why it is that you like some things and you don't like other things, and why it is that other people like those things you don't like and don't like the things you like? Why is that? And, as an extension of that, why do some people resonate with you and others don't? And why is it that you resonate with some people and not with others? Please join me as we dive deep into the core of all these questions and look at the principle that operates what it is that drives and motivates all of human behavior at a personal level. Welcome back, friends and family, freaks, geeks, weirdos, my people. I'm so honored to have you here again for episode number 3 of The Cult of Inquiry. So today's episode is going to be more of a teaching episode than it is an exploring episode. I'm going to lay the foundation with what I think is some core, crucial information you're not going to want to miss on understanding how to really get leverage over yourself and how to really transform your life. Since you're an artist, since you're a creator and a creative, and your life is your ultimate work of art, I want to empower you. I want to give you the tools and the skills and the understandings of how to get your hands in there and get the leverage over yourself to really transform your life into the shape that you want it to be. Before we get after that, I want to just let you know, as kind of a side note, that it is windy as can be outside right now. It's like 50 miles an hour. I'm podcasting in the craziest windstorm I've seen in a minute. Kind of feel like Dorothy inside a little shack in The Wizard of Oz trying to podcast to you. That's kind of the vibe right now. So if you hear some noise in the background, you hear some rumbles, you hear things crashing around, pay no attention to that. I'll do my best, of course, to try to process afterwards and take all the noise out of the recording as best I can. But from an audio standpoint, this is not exactly ideal conditions to be podcasting in. So please bear with me a little bit. So before we go ahead and dive into this week's topic, I want to just take a moment to kind of welcome you if you're a new listener and tell you a little bit about why I'm making this podcast and what you can expect out of it, so you know up front whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you in terms of your interests. So if it isn't, you can just switch it off, switch to another podcast. And if it is, hopefully you'll know you're in the right place. Every time I try to articulate this elevator speech, it ends up being 6 or 7 minutes. I'm going to try and make it shorter here. So let me just kind of get to the heart of it real quick. There are 3 reasons that I'm making this podcast that I really believe in. I could go off on a rant about each one, but I'll try to make it quick. Reason number 1 is that I really believe in making coaching and mental health and personal transformation tools available to a wider audience of people at a much more affordable scale. So I'm trying to do stuff that's free with podcasts and with YouTube videos. I will have a Patreon at some point where you pay, I think maybe $10 a month is kind of the number I'm shooting for. And you get a bunch of free courses. You're going to get actual personal development, self-transformation courses that are cutting edge, high-end shit on the back end so that you can grow and heal at your own pace at a really affordable rate. And then I'll be making some bigger, kind of more in-depth courses for people who are kind of the hardcore nerds of this stuff who want to really go deep with it. So there will be multiple levels of affordability and engagement for you so that you can pick what's right for you. And I think it's so important because there's so many people out there that need mental, emotional, and spiritual healing that can't afford to go to a therapist, can't afford to go to a life coach, but yet could really benefit from the tools and are amazing, beautiful people that have something to give in the world. So I want to make that available. Reason number 2 is that I wanted to kind of unplug from the teacher-student kind of expert listener kind of paradigm that often happens in personal development, especially when I'm coaching or when I'm doing hypnotherapy. That happens a lot. And I think some of the most juicy stuff that changes lives happens just in open-ended conversation. So I want to kind of create a space where we can open up inquiry and explore together rather than just be an expert and a teacher all the time. Third reason is that I wanted to create a personal development that's really tailored to creatives, to mystics, to spiritual seekers, to intellectuals, philosophers, artists, open-minded people. This is really for you guys. If you're that kind of person that is more open, that is more interested in deep ideas rather than just the kind of generic success, work hard kind of personal development stuff you hear all the time for entrepreneurs, then this is really going to be for you. So hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully that wasn't too long of a riff and a rant. Let's go ahead and dive into this week's topic. So this week begins our two-part series on values. And the reason I'm doing this is that I felt like early on when I was planning this podcast out, I wanted to create a nice setup for all the conversations we're about to have in the coming podcasts. And so in order to do that, I want to give you guys a nice, solid, powerful foundation for understanding yourself and understanding the world and understanding what it is that shapes the way the world is and the way you are, so that you can then go about changing it and creating the life that you want to create. And values are really at the heart of all of that. Values are why we do everything we do, everything you've ever done, every action you've taken, every action you've not taken, everything you care about, everything that is important to you lies in your values. And so understanding your values is really the key to understanding yourself and your behaviors and your actions, which of course shapes your life, which of course is the answer to why your life is the way it is, and also the answer of how to change your life into what you want it to be. So values really are everything. I will do my best in this podcast to try and explain to you with as much clarity as I can what values are and how they work. This is a bit of an abstract topic, so hopefully I do a good job of making it clear for you. If for some reason it's too out there, please let me know and I will do my best to follow up. And I suspect, I'm just going to be real with you here, I suspect that this is a conversation we will be touching upon and revisiting over and over and over, because I really think, I know that values are a core, crucial part of understanding what it means to be a human being, understanding the human experience, and understanding why our world is the way it is. So if you want that kind of insight and that kind of clarity, you've got to really look at and wrap your head and your heart around values. You see, values are at the heart of all meaning. Everything meaningful in life attaches to our set of values. And so in order to really communicate well about what a meaningful life is for you, in order to understand your own sense of what a meaningful life is, or as a creator, in order to be able to convey and create meaning for other people, you have to operate within the realm of values. There's no way not to use values to convey meaning, because values are what's meaningful to a human being. So if you want to think in terms of creativity, in terms of having impact for people, or you want to think in terms of, tapping into the juice inside yourself and feeling fully alive and understanding what it is that moves you and inspires you, the answer is always going to be values. So in order to set up the kind of conversation I'd like to have with you guys about values and about life and about personal growth and about the world around us, in order to make all that possible, first I've got to just kind of set up a set of understandings so that we are in a mutual understanding of what I mean when I say values. So a lot of this teaching, a lot of what I'm going to share, comes from the world of hypnotherapy and hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And this is really what they've unpacked in those fields and those areas of study in terms of what values are. So the definitions I'm going to give you here come from those worlds. So let's go ahead and dive in. Most of this podcast is going to be really informative. It's going to be hopefully something that really clarifies for you. When you think of the word values, you'll know after this. You'll know when I say the word values, you'll know what I mean, so that we can go ahead and start to have a bigger dialogue and a bigger conversation about values in the world and how they shape the world that we live in. So first, let's go ahead and just begin by defining what a value is. So according to NLP and hypnosis, values are abstract ideals that we have identified as important to us. So two key words there, abstract and important. So values are abstract ideals. They're not concrete things that are important to us. It's important to know that values naturally exist in a hierarchy. There are things that are more important to you, and there are things that are less important to you. And so not all values subjectively for each one of us are created equal. And on that note, it's important to note that obviously different people have different values in their hierarchy. So while you may share values with other people, where it's placed in your hierarchy of values might be different than where it's placed in their hierarchy of values. Another thing, values are most often unconscious. Values are a generalization that we make about the world and a filter that we use to decide good and bad, right and wrong, desirable and undesirable. So we sort the world through values. We filter out what it is that we want to be a part of our lives and a part of our experience based on our values. And this filtering, this sorting happens at the unconscious level. So while it is that you might think you know what your values are, you might be like, well, I value this, I value that, I value art, I value money, I value friends, I value whatever it is. That's at the surface level of what you're conscious of. But if you unpack all those things that you value even more deeply, you will discover your core values operating underneath the surface that you didn't even realize were your values. The easiest way to get to your values, by the way, if you just want to begin to unpack them, is to ask yourself the following question. What's important about whatever? So you pick something that is important to you. For example, let's say music, right? Just off the top of my head here. And then you ask yourself, well, what's important to you about music? And then as you feel into yourself and you think about it, some answers will arise in you. Those will be some values. And then you can even take that a level deeper and you can look at each of one of those values and you could say, okay, let's say you said what's important about music, fun, beauty. So then you could ask what's important about fun and what's important about beauty. And you'll start to arrive at some really deep, profound, abstract level stuff that is unconscious that are your values. So it's important to note that your top 3 values are the ones that run your life. Your life is shaped profoundly by your top 3 values. So it's so important to begin to extract out and discover what it is that are your top 3 values, because in those you have the power to remold your life if you can shape your values or change your values. So if you're not getting the results you want in your life, it's because your top 3 values are potentially not in alignment with what it is that you want to experience. Your values can change over time without you recognizing that they have. So this is important. Values do change. We can change them consciously, or more often what happens is that we change them unconsciously, that as we grow and evolve as human beings, we just come to new feelings, new phases of life, new emotions, new insights, new understandings that organically shape-shift our values and change them. And often it's important to note also that our values are inherited from our families, our friends, and our culture. So some of our values are personal to us. They are things that we have identified and chosen as important to us personally and individually. But a lot of our values are actually things that have been instilled or installed in us by life experience, by the container we grew up in, the cultural container we grew up in, by the contacts and the associations we had, by the life experiences we had that demanded that we create certain values, by the exposure, both good and bad, to life that creates our sense of values. So in short, your values are what are most meaningful to you. All the meaning in life lives in your values. So continuing on here, we have two types of values, basically. We have what are called ends values, and then we have what are called means values. So an end value would be something that is kind of broad and abstract and is what you're moving towards in your life. It's the end you want to get to. It's the experience you want to have. It's the thing that you're driven to experience over and over and over. It's usually a way of feeling. It's a broad, abstract feeling. So some examples would be joy or peace or excitement or wisdom or comfort or happiness. These are all ends values, and they are really what control our lives. They're the things that we are driven towards at all cost, right? And then we have means values. Means values are the way we get to our ends values. So they are the things we are driven to do. They're the strategies that we employ to try and get to our ends values. So you notice all the ends values are, like I said, abstract, broad. You have joy, peace, happiness, excitement, feeling alive. So these are all basically what you could call a state, like a psychosomatic mind-body state, a way of feeling, right? Means values, on the other hand, are things like money, power, hard work, communication, weightlifting, exercise. These would all be means values. They are all ways of getting you to an end goal, which might be feeling good, looking good, happiness, passion, that kind of thing, right? So means values are much more physical and concrete, typically. So an easy way to identify what your values are is to look at, is it a broad abstract thing or is it more physical and concrete? Now, some of these can seem like both, like money can seem broad and abstract, but it's also clearly very concrete. You know when you have money, you know when you don't. Same with like power, for example. Power is also a broad abstract concept, but you can experience directly when you have power and when you don't. And it is also a means towards another end, sometimes like happiness or peace or whatever, impact. Most people, by the way, are hung up on their struggle for their means values, not realizing that it's the ends, the way that it makes them feel, that they're really after. So this is a key thing. The reason that most people are stuck in the rat race, stuck in the grind, is because they are hung up on their means values. And here's the real key thing to learn about this, is that when you have more than one way to get to your ends value, so let's say it's happiness. So if you have only one way to get to happiness, then you're going to be stressed out. But if you have multiple ways to get to happiness, the more flexible you are in getting to that same end value, the more likely you are to feel fulfilled in that part of your life, and the more likely you are to have attained that value more often, right? So if you want to fulfill your values, then the way to do that is to find multiple ways of meeting that value. When you only have one way, typically that's going to be an area of life that presents a problem. So another key point about values is that they are a source of motivation in life. If you think about it, every single action you've ever taken was driven by some sort of value. Some sort of value system underlies every single action you've ever taken. And there are really two major directions that we move in terms of motivation with values. We're either moving towards pleasure or we're moving away from pain. Most commonly for most people, I would say most action is taken moving away from some sort of pain. And that doesn't have to be a physical pain. That could be a psychological pain, an emotional pain, just the pain of an inconvenience or discomfort. It doesn't have to be a major pain. But I would say what drives most people's behavior is trying to avoid pain. Trying to avoid the pain of being broke, trying to avoid the pain of being lonely, trying to avoid the pain of whatever. I'm sure you get my point. And what's interesting about this, just as a side note, is that when people are motivated only to avoid pain and aren't motivated towards a pleasure that they want to achieve or experience over and over, what tends to happen is that they will only get as far as they need to get out of pain, and then they will lose their motivation. So if that sounds familiar to you, if you kind of like procrastinate, then you get a fire lit under your ass because things get bad, then you take action, you get yourself out of trouble, get yourself out of, worry, and then you kind of just chill. then that's really what's going on, is that you are motivated to move away from pain and you don't have a clear-cut motivator towards pleasure. So also, values give you your direction in life. So you may have heard in other personal development kind of seminars or thoughts or talks that they'll say, find your why. Find your why, find your purpose, find your passion, find your why you want to do what you want to do. And so often when they say this kind of thing, they say it like, find your why, as if when you figure out what's meaningful to you, like, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to be famous, or I want to be the best at whatever, underwater basket weaving, whatever it is. When I find my why, then I'll be driven. But usually you'll notice the person's why that they pick is a means value. It's a concrete physical thing. I want to be the fittest. I want to be the richest. I want to be the whatever it is, right? The most powerful, right? But very rarely do people, when they're finding their why, go to the ends values. Like, I want to be truly happy, or I want to be truly at peace, or I want to be passionately alive, right? That kind of a thing. So values give you your direction in life, and the direction you want to head towards needs to be that ends value, that broad, abstract ends value that really is the juice, the real why behind why you would do anything else. So another really interesting thing about values that most people wouldn't think is that they're really what is that cause for your emotions. If you stop and think about it and you look around, I'm sure you know, or maybe you are yourself, a person who is deeply sensitive and deeply emotional and feels a lot. And I know a lot of people like this who live their lives through the filter of their emotions. And a lot of these people will often even say that if you ask them that what causes them to take action is their feelings, is their emotions. And they believe that their emotions are their truth and are kind of at cause for everything else in their lives. What's it's so interesting to me about that is that if you look more closely, your emotions operate in response to something. And that something that they operate in response to is your values, right? So your values dictate what emotions we are going to feel. The closer you come to meeting your values, the more positive emotions you're going to feel, obviously, if you think about it. And obviously, the less you fulfill your values, the more negative emotions you're going to feel. So whether, we could get more specific about what the positive or negative emotions are there, and there's obviously a whole rainbow of emotions we can feel in a given moment. Generally speaking, what kind of response we're going to have emotionally is going to be based in relationship to something, and that something is going to be your value system, your values. So when you're meeting your values, you tend to feel great. When you know what your values are, it's easier to meet them. If you don't know what your values are and they're just kind of operating under the surface and you're therefore not able to get after them that well or that quickly, and you don't have that many ways to get at your values, then you're going to tend to feel more negative emotions. And on that note, I wanted to just offer you an idea that is really my own little thought here. This is not something that I've been taught. It's not something they teach in hypnosis or NLP. This is not something, I'm not a clinical therapist. I don't have a PhD in any sort of therapy. So this is really just my own observation based on what I've seen in myself, what I've seen in other people around me. Here's what I think. I think there's a huge connection between values and depression and anxiety. Now, when I say depression, I want to be clear. I don't mean that kind of intense, hardcore, clinical, tried every med possible, tried everything possible, nothing works kind of depression. I'm not talking about that kind of extreme depression. I mean more your garden variety, malaise, sadness, demotivation, purposelessness, that sense of loss of meaning in life, depression that so many people go through in our culture and in this world, that kind of depression. I think that really when we feel that kind of depression, what it is that we're feeling an absence of our own values. We're feeling an absence of values. that nothing seems to be a value, or our values are so far away, like they're so unattainable, and we've let go of them so much that we feel we've lost touch with whether or not we care about anything at all. I think that that's what depression is. It is kind of a deleted or muted sense of any value system at all. When you have no values, nothing in life is motivating. Nothing's exciting. Nothing's worth doing. Nothing's worth working towards or having. We just kind of stall out and lose sense of like meaning in life. And I think when we feel anxious, we feel our values too strongly, but we're afraid that the things we value are unattainable, or we feel disconnected from them. So this really obviously ties into depression. And they say that anxiety and depression go hand in hand, right? That often it's kind of a circle and a loop between the two. I think the other part of that loop, is we start clinging really tightly to our values. We want something so badly that we can't have or don't feel is possible. And that feeling of disconnect starts to really overwhelm us and puts us in this feedback loop of self-reflecting on the absence of something until it becomes hyped up and exaggerated into a sense of anxiety. I think that that's what most people mean when they say, I'm depressed or I'm anxious. Most people mean, my values are out of whack in my life, and I don't know how to meet them, and I don't know how to connect to them, and I'm feeling disconnected from them, and it's causing me deep emotional distress. So I hope that made sense to you. I would certainly love to get some feedback from you guys about whether that made sense or not, whether you agree or disagree, whether you think that an absence of values might be at the heart of what creates that experience of depression, or an overemphasis of values in a kind of a fearful, clingy, attached way is part of what creates your sense of anxiety. If you think that's nonsense, I'd love to hear that too. And if you agree, I'd certainly love to hear your own experience with that thought. So moving on, another important thing to know about values is that they are contextual. So when we are in different situations, we have a different set of values that arise in that situation in order to respond to that situation. So an example of this would be if, say, all of a sudden we had a zombie apocalypse, right? And the world went to absolute chaos and horror and tragedy, and there were weird virus zombies walking around everywhere trying to eat people. If your values were something like chilling and relaxing and being lazy and feeling peace and ease all the time, that would not be a good set of values to have in a world where there's a zombie apocalypse, right? In a zombie apocalypse, you want to have values like hustle, survival, strength, discernment, being razor sharp. Those are what's going to help you survive and get through those times, not being lazy and relaxed and chill and at ease, right? So different contexts require different values to arise out of us. Another example would be like you're hanging out with someone, you're having a great time, maybe it's a new person that you just met, you're having a conversation, and all of a sudden you say something and they just snap. They just like all of a sudden lose it and go off on you or get all angry at you, or, like the whole tone of the conversation changes. It's like, well, what is that? Well, it's what happened is that the conversation shifted contexts. You said something that shifted the context for that other person, and all of a sudden a whole other set of values came out of them, and those values, brought with them an emotional response that's appropriate for them and their conception of the world to whatever that new context in the conversation is. So you got to understand that values are contextual to different parts of life. And sure, we do have a master set of values that are kind of generalized to life in general and rule our lives in general, but there are also values that you have in different situations. So it's important to also be looking at that when you're considering what are the values that rule your life. And I wanted to just talk about one more kind of teaching point here to kind of finalize this little mini educational podcast on values to you guys. Hopefully this is all making sense. Hopefully this is of value to you. Hopefully this is kind of hitting home and helping you more clearly understand values. So the last point I want to make about values before we go ahead and wrap up here is really contrasting values against beliefs and ideas so that you can understand a bit more about what a value is in relationship to other subjective aspects of our experience as a human being. So a value is something, like we already said, that's important to us, right? By contrast, a belief is something that we hold to be true. That belief about something true could be something that's not important, or it could be something that's very important, but either way, we'll have a belief. And then an idea is simply a thought we think. Now, here's what's interesting about this. It seems to be that the way beliefs work, ideas kind of cluster around a belief. So you'll have multiple ideas about a topic that tend to add up to form a belief, right? So belief, again, is something that we hold to be true. So if we have multiple thoughts about something that adds up to create a sense of something we hold to be true, that's called a belief. And when you look at most personal development, personal change work, you'll so often hear about limiting beliefs and beliefs being the level that we want to change things at. But here's where it gets really interesting. Beliefs cluster around values. So when we have multiple beliefs about something, those add up to create a sense of a value. So when you shift a value, you're shifting multiple beliefs and by extension, many ideas all at once. So shifting values generalizes and creates a bigger change inside a person than belief level change or idea level change. So I just want to make that distinction for you so you know the difference between values, beliefs, and ideas, because they all happen inside of us, right? But values are this deeper, broader, more core thing, where belief is like something we hold to be true, but it could be changeable, and ideas are just perceptions. They're thoughts we think. They're ways of seeing that are even more changeable than, say, belief. I really hope that this is starting to illuminate some insight for you, that you're starting to get more self-awareness about yourself and what motivates and drives your action. And by extension, I really hope that this is starting to help you get a sense of what drives people around you. I mean, if you really pay attention, if you really stop and look and listen, and you really are looking and taking in people around you, you'll start to recognize what their values are. You'll start to recognize what it is that motivates them to do something positive, or what it is that they can't stand and want to fight and push and rebel against. When you're listening for that kind of stuff, you're going to see their values. And that's a really powerful way to gain insight into the human condition, to gain insight into how other people work, how the world works around you, what motivates and drives all action and behavior, and really what motivates and drives you. So I hope this is starting to really kind of hit home for you in terms of how deep this stuff is. I wanted to just say a couple other things about values, kind of, outside of the teaching stuff, kind of more commentary about what it was that we just explored and looked at there. It's really important to understand that in your life, behind every single problem you have, there's a value being met. I know that sounds crazy, but stop and think about it. If you really unpacked why, the why of your problems, the why of the things you do that are problematic in your life. And, not trying to point the finger, because we all have problems and we all do things to add to our own problems. If you really unpack that stuff and you really look at it, what you're going to discover is that there's some value, there's something that is being met, that is being preserved, that's important in life. I would even say a positive value, something really good underneath, dare we say, dysfunctional behavior. Likewise, behind every strength you have, behind every powerful part of yourself, behind every gift you carry and skill that's natural and inherent inside of you, you're also going to find a value being met. You wouldn't operate in any way that was that good if it didn't meet some sort of value for yourself. And likewise, you wouldn't operate in any sort of weird, like, why the hell am I doing that kind of way if there wasn't some value being met there. So values really are what drives and shapes our behavior, both positive and negative. And at some level, values are this is really, I think, an interesting idea. If you stop and you think about it, values are they're coordinates, right? They're ways that we aim ourselves in life. They're things we try to push ourselves towards and reach for in life that we find personally meaningful and rewarding. They are our guidance system, right? And if you stop to think about that, That means that at some level, values are a set of common solutions and responses to the problems that life presents us with. So, life presents us with interesting problems like we grew up as a species, let's say, we evolved in a container called nature that is wildly brutal, intense, frightening, scary. It's life or death all the time in nature. And while that's all going on in the background, one of the ways that we respond to that is that means that often we are unhappy and we're afraid and we're frightened. And so if you value happiness, that's a response to life. That's a response to the stresses of life. That's a response to knowing what it means to be unhappy, right? If you value peace, that's a response to knowing what it is to feel stressed out and overwhelmed. If you value fun, that's a response to knowing what it's like to feel bored and dull and just numb in the head, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So values, it's really interesting because other people will have the same values you have out there in the world. Like I said, not everyone will have it in the same level of hierarchy that you do, but obviously lots of people share the same values because, otherwise we would all be completely unique individuals speaking totally different languages to each other. We'd have no way to connect. The whole way we connect with each other is through our values. And so if you stop and you think about it, at some level, there is a universality to these very personal, very subjective targets in life that we call our values. I think that might be a good place to stop and end this podcast for now. And I hope you got something out of that. I hope that you see some meaning and you see some relevance in understanding your values and getting in touch with what it means to feel them and know what they are. And if you want to discover what they are, I will be offering a course down the line, on how to do values work. You can also look up online. There's tons of information on NLP and values work. You can learn how to elicit your own values and discover what they are, what drives you, what motivates you. And even if you already know, I hope that is something you just reinforce and take in more deeply inside of yourself, that sense. Because as you know your values, you know yourself. You know what drives you. You know what's important to you at the most core level of your being. And when you know that, then you can go out there and you can achieve it. You can attain it. You can reach for it. You can find creative new ways to meet your values so that you're not stuck with only one way to be or one way to operate. And, like I said, once you start to know that your values are what drives your behavior and you're looking at some behavior of yours that you don't like, that you keep doing, the obvious question is to start to look at, well, what's the value that's driving this behavior? Why am I still doing this? What is it that's positive? What's being met here underneath the surface that causes me to explore over and over behaving in this way? So I hope that leaves you with some insight about yourself and about what drives you, what motivates you, and just coming full circle, do you think now you have a sense of why we keep having the same problems that we have? Or what it is that really motivates us, or why we do some things compulsively and why we don't do some of the things that we should, that we think would be good for us, or what dictates our preferences in our life, or why it is that we resonate with some people and not with others. I hope you can see now that the answer to all of those questions is your values. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining me and spending this time together. And please, like, subscribe, tell a friend about the podcast if you're getting value out of this. And I'll be continuing to upload week after week, year after year. Take care and be well.